It began quietly, as history's greatest disasters often do. Not with armies, not with fire, not with the sound of kings falling from their thrones. It began with ships. They came low in the water, their sails loose in the wind, drifting toward the ports of the Mediterranean as if
No
already
wind
abandoned
can
by the
fill the
living.
canvas.
Their hulls were heavy with silk, spice, wax, and grain, wealth from the east, goods desired by every merchant from Constantinople to Genoa. But below the decks, in the dark, another cargo moved unseen, small, hungry, patient. Rats, fleas, a disease with no flag, no religion, no
This
mercy.
crimson is
By
exquisite.
the autumn of
What is your price per
1347,
bolt?
Europe
For you,
still believed
master,
itself
only 50
solid.
florins.
Its
A very
cathedrals
fair
rose
price.
over stone cities. Lords ruled from high walls. Priests spoke of divine order. Markets overflowed. Bells marked the hours. Fields were cut by peasants who had no reason to suspect that the world they knew was already beginning to rot from within. Then the first bodies appeared at the docks of Messina in Sicily. Sailors staggered ashore with black swellings under their arms and in their groins, their skin burning with fever, their breath sour with infection. Some collapsed on the piers before they could speak. Others were already dead when the ships arrived, sprawled among ropes and cargo, their faces darkened, their mouths fixed open in silence. The people on shore recoiled, but too late. Trade did not
What
stop.
happened to them?
They
Curiosity
are
did not
dead.
stop.
Look at their
Fear did
skins.
not stop men from
Holy Mother,
hauling crates,
protect us!
tying ropes, touching
Keep
wood,
away from him.
cloth,
He has the
skin.
plague. Look at his neck.
And the plague stepped onto Europe like a conqueror. It moved faster than rumor and deeper than prayer. From Sicily to Genoa, from Genoa to Marseille, from Marseille inland through roads thick with merchants, pilgrims, beggars, and carts. The disease followed the lines of commerce like fire running along dry rope. It needed no army because Europe carried it for free. In city after city, life narrowed to symptoms: a headache, heat behind the eyes, sudden weakness,
Get back quickly!
then
Hide
the
yourself! What is
swelling,
it, Mama?
hard,
Move back!
painful knots rising beneath the skin like stones pushed up from the earth. Then vomiting, delirium, blood in the spit, dark stains on the flesh. Some died in 3 days, some in one. Some were well at sunrise and buried by nightfall. There was no cure because no one understood the enemy. Doctors in long robes studied urine. They bled patients. They burned herbs. They muttered theories about poisoned air, divine wrath, conjunctions of planets. None of it mattered. The plague did not negotiate. Across Italy, church bells began to ring, not for ceremonies, but for funerals, so often that in some places they stopped ringing altogether. There were too many dead. In Florence, the wealthy fled to
How much
country
further
villas,
is it to the next
carrying
town?
infection with them.
We won't make it
In
before dark
Paris,
at this pace.
crowded streets became corridors of dread. In Avignon, where the papacy resided, priests blessed the dying until the dying were too many to count. In London, carts rolled at dawn and dusk, collecting bodies from doorways and alley corners. The dead were wrapped in cloth if cloth could be spared. If not, they were carried as they were. Europe's great cities were not built for death on this scale. They were built for markets, processions, and war, not for the daily collapse of thousands. Gravediggers became more important than nobles. Carters became witnesses to the end of households. Bakers vanished. Blacksmiths vanished. Mothers vanished. Children wandered the streets stunned with hunger, not yet understanding that the silence behind the door meant they were alone in the world. The countryside offered no rescue. Villages lost half their people. Some lost nearly all. Fields were left uncut. Wheat rotted where it stood. Livestock wandered between empty cottages. Wells went foul. Roads grew dangerous not because of soldiers, but because law itself was thinning. Fear made people cruel. Doors were barred. Strangers were turned away. The sick were abandoned. The old were left with water and a prayer. Family, which had once been the last defense against suffering, began to fracture under the terror of infection.
The deferent and
Love
the
itself
catastrophically
became
explain the
dangerous,
retrograde
and
motion of
yet
the planets.
not
It was
everyone
crucial
ran.
you grasp this
Some
concept
stayed.
before the plague arrives.
A nun washing the face of a dying child in a convent infirmary. A parish priest entering a plague house though he knew what waited inside. A physician returning to the bedside of the sick after burying his own son. Anonymous courage flickered everywhere, small and unspectacular, swallowed almost immediately by the scale of the catastrophe. But it was there. In every age of collapse, someone still chooses to step closer instead of away. By 1348, the plague had reached deep into the heart of Europe. France, Spain, the German lands, England. It crossed mountains, rivers, and walls as if geography
Move
were a
faster.
human
Place
superstition.
the chests by the
There were no
driver.
front lines,
We ride south.
no safe kingdom, no treaty to sign. Kings issued orders and watched them fail. Town councils tried quarantines, sanitation, isolation, prayer processions, public burnings of refuse. Sometimes the measures slowed panic. They did not stop death. The human mind,
1,
desperate
2,
for control,
3, 4, 5,
searched for
6,
causes
7,
it could
8,
punish.
9, 10,
Minorities were blamed.
12, 13,
Foreigners were blamed. Beggars, lepers, and Jews became targets of suspicion and rage in many regions. Wells were said to be poisoned. Conspiracies were imagined. Entire communities were attacked by neighbors who needed someone visible to stand in for an invisible horror. Under the weight of fear, civilization peeled back and old hatred found new fuel. The plague killed with disease, but it also summoned murder. Meanwhile, the natural world continued with terrible indifference. Spring returned. Grass grew over graves. Rivers kept moving. Sunlight poured across church towers and market squares where the living walked around the dead. In that contrast lay the true violence of the era. The world did not stop. It made room for catastrophe and kept going. By 1349 and 1350, Europe had changed shape. Labourers were suddenly scarce. Landowners could not command as they once had. Whole inheritances passed into the hands of survivors who had never expected wealth. The authority of the church, though still immense, had been wounded by its inability to explain or halt the suffering. Traditional hierarchies trembled. If death could take a bishop and a beggar with equal speed, then what exactly separated them in the eyes of fate? That question lingered long after the fever passed. The plague was not a single blow. It came in waves, retreating, then returning. Towns that believed themselves spared discovered they had only been postponed. Families rebuilt and were broken again. Markets reopened under the shadow of recurrence. Every cough in a crowded room became a threat. Every traveller from another region carried suspicion like dust on his cloak. And still, Europe endured. Not because it was ready, not because it was noble, not because it understood what was happening. It endured because human beings are built somehow to continue through things that should break them completely. By 1353, the first 7 terrible years had done their work. Between a third and a half of Europe's population may have been gone. The exact number disappeared with the victims, but the emptiness they left behind was visible everywhere. Empty farms, empty guild benches, empty monasteries, streets that had once pressed shoulder to shoulder with life now echoed. The continent had not merely lost people, it had lost confidence in the permanence of its
You'll not
own
steal from
order.
me again, you
What remained
cur.
was a
Take
scar across memory. The plague entered art, sermons, law, medicine, and myth. It altered the economy, rearranged power, and darkened the imagination of generations.
You are not
It
permitted
taught
entry.
Europe that
Look back.
magnificence
I'm in no
offered
harm.
no
Sorry,
immunity,
seek passage.
not
The
castles,
gate is closed.
not
By order of the
universities,
magistrate,
not
none shall
monasteries,
pass.
not crowns. Under the skin, all were fragile. Under fever, all were equal. And that may be why the Black Death still grips the modern mind, not only because it killed so many, but because it revealed something unbearable and permanent.
This and the
That civilization, however splendid, is thinner than it appears. That beneath ceremony and stone lies flesh, breath, blood, contagion, chance. For 7 years, Europe watched death walk openly through its streets. It rode in ships and carts. It slept in straw. It hid in seams of cloth.
God
It waited
save
in
us.
marketplaces,
Look,
monasteries,
sister is still standing
ports,
there. We must
bedrooms,
hide.
and prayer halls. It crossed borders without needing to see them. It crushed certainty, mocked wealth, and turned whole cities into graveyards of unfinished lives. And when it finally loosened its grip, Europe emerged older than the years that had passed. The bells rang again. The markets reopened. Children were born into houses that still carried the memory of the dead. But nothing was the same,
Here, take this. Thank
because
you
once a
kindly.
continent has looked into that abyss, once it has watched half its world vanish into pits, smoke, and silence, it does not return unchanged. It rebuilds, it remembers, and somewhere, beneath every stone laid after, remains the shadow of those 7 years that shook Europe